Hello guys, Sidewinder_124 back again, and today we're going to be talking about the M4 Sherman tank. Okay, so let's get right into it. When the M4 came out, it was widely considered to be one of the best tanks of its time. It was fast, maneuverable, had decent armor for its time, and had a turret-mounted 75mm gun, as opposed to the 75mm gun that was mounted in the hull of the M3 Lee and Grant tanks. When the German Tiger and Panther tanks became more common on the battlefield, the United States Armored Corps reluctantly upgraded the Sherman with a new turret which had a 76mm gun. And that gun could punch through the tough armor of the Tigers and the Panthers. The British also upgraded their Shermans, and they put the 17-pounder gun, which was actually a 76.2mm gun. The British gun was considered to be a better anti-tank weapon, but the American gun was considered to be more accurate. The United States also tried fitting the M4 with a 105mm howitzer. The 105mm was better at anti-tank / anti-fortification roles than it was at anti-tank, which is considerable, seeing that the howitzer is built for destroying fortifications and other hard emplacements, while an actual anti-tank gun has to punch through armor. But the 105 wasn't meant for that. So there was another upgrade that the United States tried, and that was adding extra armor to the M4A3E2. It was better known as the Jumbo. The only drawback to the Jumbo was the fact that it was only given a 75mm gun, which, as we already know, was not good for taking out Tigers and Panthers. So the crews, and many of the crews I should say, actually end up replacing the 75 with the more capable 76. So, this increased combat effectiveness. So, many generals, including General George S. Patton, demanded more Jumbos, but supply never came close to meeting the demand of the Jumbos. So, many generals ordered the armor from destroyed Shermans to be cut off the burnt-out husks and welded onto the sides of M4s that were fitted with the 76mm gun. So, after World War II, the Sherman continued to fight in Korea with the United States, and at the beginning of Korea it served in the anti-tank role, but later it became just a mobile artillery piece like the M26 Pershing and M46 Patton. So the Sherman actually continues to serve to this day with many foreign and third world countries because they just made so many of them. Like, I believe the Sherman is the third most mass-produced tank in history, which is something amazing coming from a tank that was designed in 41 and I believe first rolled off the factory in 42. So it's really amazing, actually. Countries like Israel actually made some modifications of the Sherman where they added a much better 75mm gun, which is more like the Panther's gun, and another one where they added I believe a 105mm anti-tank gun, not a howitzer, like an actual anti-tank gun, and those were called the Super Shermans. And I believe it was the Egyptians, they put a turret from a French AMX tank onto the Sherman, which was essentially another type of Super Sherman because it increases firepower by quite a bit, actually. So the Sherman is actually very versatile. One plan that the United States government actually had for upgrading the Sherman was to take the turret from an M26 Pershing and just fit it to a Sherman chassis, and they'd have a Sherman with a 90mm gun. So that was actually something quite incredible, or at least it would have been incredible if they actually did it, because they built one or two like that, but the main problem was with mobility, and the turret was just so massive. It's like the turret itself was about the same size as the Sherman's hull. I'm not kidding. So yeah, in ammo, it couldn't carry as much ammo. But they did eventually put the turret from an M36 Jackson onto the M4A3 hull, and that was called an M36B, I believe, but they still called it a Jackson, even though it was more Sherman than Jackson. But the Sherman is absolutely, hands down, one of the greatest tanks of World War II, even though if by the end it wasn't technologically the greatest. The Sherman also served with just about every country during the World War II, because obviously it's an American tank, so we used it. America used it, and we used it in mass droves. But it was also a Lend-Lease tank. So Lend-Lease is, if you don't already know, is where in World War II, the United States, Britain, and Russia, and any other country that was part of the Allied powers, they would share technology and equipment. So the United States sent thousands of Sherman tanks to countries like Canada, the Great Britain, and the USSR, Russia. So it essentially ended up being the most used tank by the Allies, because, well, there was thousands of them built, and all sides used them. Canada even produced some of the tanks that they used, like they produced a version of the M4A1, which you see here, but it was made in Canada and license built in Canada, so it was actually called the Grizzly, and it was just the exact same tank that I'm using right here. But they gave them to Russia also, and Russia actually liked them pretty well. They were quieter and I believe faster than the T-34. So a tactic that some of the Russian commanders would use is they would have the T-34s go and fight in front of the, like, and push on a German position, but they'd have their Shermans drive and flank around and back and hit them from behind and essentially do what the Germans call the pincer movement, which it's brilliant, honestly. So there were actually multiple different upgrades and modifications that were done to the Sherman, more than what I actually covered. So I'll try to cover those now. The M4 had two different types of suspension systems underneath of it. One of them was the vertical volute spring suspension, or VVSS, and the other one was the horizontal volute spring suspension, so HVSS. So they work almost the same way, but they're not exactly at all alike. So, or at least they look kind of similar. So the M41 that I'm using right now has a VVSS. So the spring is fitted vertically, and so the shocks work vertically, and that's how it does its suspension. The springs go up and down. But on an HVSS, the springs don't do that. They are positioned horizontally. So every time one of the idler wheels on the bogie goes up, or not idler wheels, just a bogie wheel, I guess, goes up, when it, like, say if it's trying to climb a position or anything, or, you know, any debris, it'll actually push the spring which is positioned horizontally in, and that's how it takes care of its suspension. So that is just a little bit of difference, but they did actually require different tracks because the VVSS suspension required a narrow track, while the HVSS required a wide track. In the track that was on the HVSS, HVSS suspension tanks is more similar to what's on tanks now. It was two treads that were side by side, essentially. So, yeah. I'd also like to talk about the difference in engines. The Sherman was produced from 41 to 45, so in that time there's a lot of different developments with the engine. So some Shermans ended up having aircraft engines, and some had diesel engines. Some had, actually most had just regular gasoline engines. But the thing about the engines at the time was, even though something was a V8 or what have you, it wasn't actually as powerful as, say, a V8 in your truck now. So some Shermans actually had like 2 or more engines all in the engine compartment, but all feeding into the same powertrain, which is kind of an interesting concept to think of now. But at the same time, it was war, and they did what they had to do because they needed to produce as many as they possibly could. That's one of the reasons why the Sherman actually wasn't replaced in like full frontline combat until the 50s, just because the United States said we need to be able to outproduce the enemy, and that's what they did. So that's why there's so many Shermans, that's why there's still some knocking around today, and why they had so many different engines installed. Now, I'd like to talk about the different variations of the Sherman. The 2 Shermans that I've used in this video have both been M4A1s, but that actually doesn't mean all that much. All the A1 means is that it has a cast hull. So there's I'm just going to talk about the whole variation system of the Shermans. Just because like one Sherman is a M4, just a normal M4, and then one is a M4A2, does not necessarily mean that the A2 or A3 or A4, anything like that, is going to be better than just a normal Sherman. All the A whatever, that's like alteration 1, alteration 2. So if there's anything different in the manufacturing or in the design, they add an A, then a number, or on top of that, an E, and then a number. So like the M4 A3 E8, that is a Sherman that was known as an Easy 8, and those were widely produced later on in the war, and those were the ones that were mostly used in Korea. But other than that, there's really not that much difference from this tank and an Easy 8. So it should also be stated that just because something's an A3 or an A4 or an A5, A6, whatever, it may have a 75mm gun. It most likely had a 75mm gun, or it may have a 76mm gun. The thing is, not only certain models of the Sherman were actually factory fitted, or more commonly fitted, with a 76mm gun. So that'd be the M4A1, the M4A2, and the M4A3. Did normal M4s with a 76 happen? If they were modified on the battlefield that way. If their turret got damaged beyond repair and they had a 76mm turret, they would. but that's just that. So we're reaching the end of the video, and I'd just like to thank you guys for watching. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you think of the video. If you think I should do anything different, tell me. I'm open for suggestions. And with that out of the way, thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!